Some questions cut deeper than fists. Some strangers see what everyone else pretends not to notice. This is the story of a woman who learned to hide her pain, and the man who refused to look away. Who hit you, Jada? Before we begin, if you love powerful stories about courage, healing, and unexpected love, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Your support means everything. Music softens to ambient cafe sounds, rain, distant chatter, clinking dishes. The first bruise had bloomed like spilled ink beneath Jada's jaw, dark, tender, impossible to miss. She had traced its edges in the tiny bathroom mirror of her studio apartment that morning, dabbing on concealer thick enough to hide the truth. It had been 4 days since Minho Choi had lost his temper. 4 days of rehearsing the same tired lie. I walked into a cabinet door. 4 days of her co-workers glancing, then quickly looking away. Just a few more months, she had whispered to her reflection that morning, her Jamaican accent thick with exhaustion. A few more months of double shifts, of sleeping on this lumpy futon, of saving every one, and then I'll have enough to disappear. Seoul's Blue Orchid Cafe had been her sanctuary for nearly 2 years. It wasn't glamorous, soft jazz playing over expensive espresso machines, marble-top tables, silk curtains that barely muffled the rain outside. But the tips were generous, and her manager, Mrs. Park, a sharp-eyed woman who'd seen too much of life, never asked questions when Jada needed extra shifts, or when she showed up with ghosts painted across her skin. The evening shift had been like any other businessman nursing whiskey, university students hunched over laptops, couples murmuring over candlelight, until he walked in. The air changed. Conversations didn't stop, but they quieted. The kind of quiet that comes when an apex predator enters the room. Jin Woo Lee moved like shadows poured into human form. Black-on-black suit tailored to perfection, a gold cross glinting at his throat, tattoos crawling up his neck like ancient scripture. His eyes, dark, unreadable, devastating, swept the room once before landing on an empty booth by the rain-streaked window. Jada's hands trembled slightly as she approached, her notepad clutched like a shield. "Good evening," she said, forcing brightness into her voice. "What can I get started for you?" "Coffee. Black." His voice was low, textured like smoke and whiskey. "And your name for the—" "Jada." He said her name before she could finish. His eyes flicked to the name tag pinned to her uniform, then rose to her face with unsettling intensity. Her pulse quickened. "Right. And you are?" "Jin Woo Lee." She nodded, scribbling on her pad, eager to escape the weight of his gaze. But as she turned, his next words stopped her cold. "Who hit you?" The cafe noise seemed to evaporate. The rain against the windows became deafening. Jada's breath caught. Heat flooded her cheeks. Every customer in the room suddenly felt too close, too aware. I'm sorry?" she stammered, her fingers instinctively rising to touch the concealer on her jaw. "You heard me." His tone wasn't cruel. It was worse, it was certain. Like he already knew the answer and was simply waiting for her to stop lying. Most people pretended not to see. Those who noticed looked away. No one had ever asked so directly. "I walked into a door," she said automatically, the lie bitter and familiar on her tongue. His dark eyes hardened, but his voice remained soft, dangerously soft. "Don't insult us both with that." Her throat tightened. Fear and indignation warred inside her chest. "I don't see how it's any of your business," she replied, struggling to keep her voice steady. Instead of anger, something almost like approval flickered across his face. The corner of his mouth lifted barely, but enough. "Sit." It wasn't a request. The single word carried a weight she couldn't explain, an authority that made her knees bend before her mind could catch up. She found herself sliding into the booth opposite him, her notepad forgotten on the table. "How long have you worked here?" he asked, his gaze never leaving hers. 2 years, she answered cautiously, unsure why she was answering at all. "And how long has he been hitting you?" She stiffened, her hands curling into fists beneath the table. "I told you. I walked into a—" "You work doubles," he interrupted, his eyes scanning her face like he was reading a book written in her exhaustion. "Saving every penny, planning something." A chill crawled down her spine. How could he possibly know that? An escape, perhaps? He continued, leaning forward. The scent of sandalwood and something darker, cedar, smoke, danger drifted toward her. "From whoever gave you that bruise." "Please," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I could lose my job if Mrs. Park thinks I'm—" Something softened in his expression. He reached into his jacket, and for a wild, irrational moment, she thought he might pull out a weapon. Instead, he withdrew a sleek black leather wallet. He placed a single card on the table between them, matte black, with a phone number embossed in silver ink. Nothing else. No name. No title. "When you're ready to stop lying to yourself, Jada," he said, sliding the card toward her with 2 fingers. "Call this number." Before she could respond, he rose in one fluid motion, pulling a crisp 100,001 bill from his wallet and placing it beside his untouched coffee. "For your trouble," he said. Then he paused. His eyes, those devastating, knowing eyes, returned to her Bruise one last time. "Everyone deserves to feel safe, Jada. Remember that." And then he was gone, the door closing softly behind him, leaving only the rain, the lingering scent of his cologne, and a black card that seemed to pulse with possibility on the laminate tabletop. The rest of her shift passed in a haze. She pocketed the card without looking at it, avoided Mrs. Park's curious glances, smiled at customers she couldn't remember. Her mind kept circling back to 3 words. "Who hit you?" By the time her shift ended, the rain had softened to a mist, leaving the streets slick and glistening under neon signs. Jada pulled her coat tighter and started the familiar walk to her tiny studio apartment, the black card a strange weight in her apron pocket. She was so lost in thought that she didn't notice the figure leaning against the building across the street, not until it was too late. Her heart plummeted as she recognized the hulking silhouette. Mingyu Choi. He pushed off the wall and started toward her, his face twisted with the kind of rage she knew too well. Her body recognized the danger before her mind, did muscles tensing, breath shallow, the world narrowing to his approaching form. "Where the hell have you been?" he demanded, grabbing her arm hard enough to bruise. "I've been calling you all day." "Working," she said, trying to pull away, her voice small. "My phone died, His eyes narrowed, and his gaze dropped to her pocket where the corner of the black card peeked out. Before she could stop him, he snatched it. "What's this?" His face darkened, veins bulging in his neck. "Whose number is this, Jada? Are you cheating on me?" "No!" She reached for the card desperately. "It's just a customer, She never finished the sentence. His open palm connected with her cheek with enough force to snap her head sideways. The impact, a sickening, familiar explosion of pain, sent her stumbling backward into the wet brick wall. "Lying bitch," he spat, tearing the card into pieces and letting them scatter like black snow across the damp pavement. "You think I don't know when you're lying to me?" Tears blurred her vision. "I'm sorry," she whispered, the words automatic, meaningless, a survival reflex. He grabbed her arm again, pulling her roughly toward him. "You're coming home with me tonight," he growled, his breath reeking of soju. "I'm not letting you out of my sight again." Terror gripped her cold, primal, absolute. The last time she'd gone to his apartment when he was like this, she'd left with cracked ribs and a month of pain she couldn't explain to anyone. She couldn't go back there. Not tonight. Not ever again. In that moment, something inside her, the part that had been slowly dying, suffocating under the weight of his fists, and her silence snapped. Maybe it was Jinwoo Lee's words echoing in her skull. Everyone deserves to feel safe. Maybe it was simply that she had reached her breaking point. She planted her feet on the wet pavement and looked Minho Choi in the eyes. "No." The word came out stronger than she felt. Steadier. Final. His expression morphed from disbelief to pure rage. "What did you just say to me?" "I said no," she repeated, her voice rising. "I'm not going with you." His hand balled into a fist. She braced herself for the blow that would break her. But before he could swing, a sleek black car with tinted windows glided to a stop beside them, its engine purring like a predator. The back door opened. "Jada." Jinwoo Lee's voice cut through the night like a blade. "Get in." She didn't hesitate. She wrenched her arm from Minho's slackened grip and dove into the car. The door closed with a solid, final thunk like the closing of a coffin, or the opening of a new life. The last thing she saw as the car pulled away was Minho's face, contorted with rage and confusion, shrinking into the rain-soaked distance. Inside the car, the scent of leather and sandalwood wrapped around her like a blanket. Jinwoo sat across from her in the dim interior, his expression unreadable, his presence overwhelming. "How did you find me?" she asked, her voice shaking, her cheek still throbbing. "I never lost you," he replied simply. She should have been terrified. She'd just escaped one dangerous man only to put herself in the hands of another one whose name made people whisper, whose very presence commanded fear. But as the adrenaline drained from her body, all she felt was an overwhelming, dizzying sense of relief. "Who are you?" she whispered. He studied her for a long moment, his dark eyes searching hers. "Someone who doesn't tolerate men who hit women," he said finally, his voice low and edged with something cold. "Someone who can make sure he never touches you again." The absolute certainty in his voice sent a shiver through her, half fear, half something she wasn't ready to name. As the car carried them deeper into the glittering heart of Seoul, toward an unknown destination and an uncertain future, Jada realized she had just crossed a line from which there would be no return. But for the first time in years, maybe in her entire life, she felt like she could breathe. The car glided through Seoul's rain-slicked streets, past the glowing blur of neon signs and late-night vendors, toward the heart of the city where glass towers kissed the sky. Jada pressed her forehead against the cool window, her reflection staring back at her bruised, exhausted, but somehow awake. She had spent 2 years surviving, 2 years hiding, 2 years convincing herself that escape was just a few more paychecks away. But everything changed the moment Jinwoo Lee asked the question no one else had dared to ask. Who hit you? To understand how they arrived here in this car, on this night, hurtling toward a future neither could predict, we need to go back to the beginning, back to the first bruise, the first lie, the first time Jada Richards learned that survival sometimes means silence. The silence inside the car was suffocating. Jada pressed herself against the far corner of the leather seat, her heart hammering against her ribs. Rain streaked the tinted windows, turning Seoul into a watercolor blur of neon and shadow. She could still taste blood in her mouth, copper and fear mixed together. Across from her, Jinwoo Lee sat perfectly still, his hands resting on his knees, his dark eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. He hadn't spoken since she'd gotten in, hadn't asked if she was okay, hadn't demanded explanations. He simply watched, like he was memorizing every detail, the bruise blooming fresh and angry on her cheek, the trembling of her hands, the way she flinched when the car hit a pothole. Finally, she couldn't take it anymore. How did you know? Her voice came out hoarse, barely above a whisper. How did you know where I'd be? I told you, he replied, his tone measured, controlled. I never lost you. A chill crawled down her spine. You were following me? Protecting you. He leaned forward slightly, his elbows resting on his knees, bringing him closer but not threateningly so. There's a difference. I don't understand. Tears burned behind her eyes, exhaustion and adrenaline finally catching up to her. You don't even know me. Why would you? Because I asked you a question at the cafe, he interrupted softly, and you lied to me. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but more importantly, you lied to yourself. And men like him, the word dripped with venom, they count on that. They thrive on your silence. Jada's breath hitched. What are you going to do to him? Jinwoo tilted his head, studying her like she was a puzzle he was still figuring out. What do you want me to do to him? She faltered. Part of her wanted to scream. Make him disappear. Make him hurt the way he hurt me. But another part, the part that had been raised to turn the other cheek, to forgive, to endure, whispered, violence only breeds more violence. I don't want anyone hurt because of me, she finally said. Something flickered in his expression, surprise. Maybe, or respect. Even after what he did to you? After years of this, especially because of that. She met his gaze, her voice steadier now. If I become like him, if I let anger turn me into someone who wants blood, then he's already won. For a long moment, Jinwoo said nothing. Then, slowly, he reached forward and pressed a button on the panel beside him. A partition slid down, revealing the driver, a broad-shouldered man with a scar along his jaw. Change of plans? Jinwoo said in Korean, his tone leaving no room for argument. Find Minho Choi. I want him brought to me alive and conscious. No hospital visits. Just compliant. The driver nodded. Yes, sir. The partition slid back up. Jada swallowed hard. What does that mean? It means, Jinwoo said, settling back into his seat, that he will learn there are consequences for putting his hands on what he has no right to touch. But since you asked for mercy, his eyes locked onto hers, he'll live. This time. The possessiveness in his words should have terrified her. But instead, it wrapped around her like a blanket, warm, suffocating, strangely comforting. I'm not yours to protect, she whispered. His lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. Not yet. The car climbed higher into the city's elite district, where the buildings kissed the clouds and money spoke louder than laws. They pulled up to a sleek glass tower that gleamed like a shard of moonlight against the night sky. Where are we? Jada asked as the car door opened. My home, Jinwoo replied simply, extending his hand to help her out. She hesitated, staring at his outstretched hand, strong, adorned with silver rings, stained with ink that crawled up his wrist. This is it, she thought, the point of no return. But when she looked back at the rain-soaked streets, at the city that had hidden her pain for so long, she realized she had nothing left to go back to. She took his hand. His grip was firm, steady, warm. He led her through a marble lobby where a doorman in white gloves bowed deeply not to her, but to him. They entered a private elevator that required both a keycard and a fingerprint scan. No buttons, no stops in between. Penthouse only, Jinwoo explained, noticing her confusion. The elevator ascended in silence, her stomach dropping with each floor they climbed. When the doors finally opened, Jada's breath caught in her throat. The penthouse was breathtaking. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcased a panoramic view of Seoul's glittering skyline, millions of lights twinkling like stars brought down to earth. The interior was sleek and modern dark wood, white marble, black leather furniture arranged with deliberate precision. Everything about it screamed power, control, wealth, but it was also lonely. There were no photographs on the walls, no personal touches, no evidence that anyone actually lived here. Your face needs to be looked at, Jinwoo said, breaking her reverie. My personal physician is on his way. I don't need a doctor, she protested weakly. He turned to face her, and for the first time since they'd met, his expression softened. Jada, you have blood on your lip, your cheek is swelling, and you're trembling like you're going to collapse. Don't make me regret giving him mercy by watching you suffer unnecessarily. The words were harsh, but his tone was gentle. Before she could argue further, the elevator chimed. An elegant older man with silver hair and kind eyes stepped out, carrying a leather medical bag. Dr. Han. Jinwoo greeted him with a slight nod. Mr. Lee. The doctor's gaze shifted to Jada, his expression shifting to one of professional concern. Let's take a look at you, dear. Jinwoo led them to a spacious living area where Dr. Han set up his supplies on the glass coffee table. Throughout the entire examination, the gentle probing of her jaw, the checking of her pupils, the careful cleaning of the cut on her lip, Jinwoo never left the room. He stood by the window, arms crossed, watching the doctor's every move with an intensity that bordered on possessive. Nothing's broken, doctor, Han finally announced, snapping his bag closed. The swelling will go down in a few days. Ice and rest. He turned to Jinwoo, his expression knowing. She'll be fine. Thank you, Jinwoo replied. Discretion as always? Of course. Dr. Han nodded politely to Jada. Take care of yourself, miss. When the elevator doors closed behind him, the silence returned heavier now, more intimate. You should rest, Jinwoo said, still facing the window. The guest room is down the hall. Second door on the left. You'll find clothes that should fit you in the closet. Why would you have women's clothes here? The question slipped out before she could stop it. He turned, one eyebrow raised. You think I entertain women here often? I don't know what to think about you. Good. He moved closer, his footsteps silent on the marble floor. Fear keeps you sharp, trust gets you killed. So I shouldn't trust you? He stopped just inches away, close enough that she could smell sandalwood and something darker, cedar smoke, rain, danger. You should trust that I meant what I said at the cafe. Everyone deserves to feel safe, and while you're under this roof, you are. And when I leave? His jaw tightened. Who says you're leaving? Her pulse quickened. You can't keep me here. I'm not keeping you anywhere. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. But Minho Choi knows your apartment, knows your workplace, knows your routine. If you go back out there tonight, I can't guarantee your safety. He was right. She hated that he was right. The clothes? She asked again, deflecting. Something vulnerable flickered across his features, gone so quickly she almost missed it. They belong to my sister. Silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken grief. Belonged? Jada repeated softly. She died 6 years ago. His voice was flat, emotionless, but his hands curled into fists at his sides. Her boyfriend killed her. By the time I found out, it was too late. Understanding crashed over her like a wave. That's why you asked? That's why I see, he corrected. Most people look at you and see a waitress. I look at you and see my sister, same excuses, same bruises, same fear in your eyes that maybe, just maybe, if you stay quiet long enough, love him hard enough, he'll stop. Tears spilled down Jada's cheeks before she could stop them. But he never does. No, Jinwoo agreed quietly. He never does. Later, after he'd shown her to the guest room, a space larger than her entire studio apartment, with a bed that looked like it belonged in a luxury hotel, Jada stood at the window, staring out at the city below. She heard his voice in the hallway, low and deadly on the phone. Find him. I want every door in Itaewon kicked down if necessary. And when you do, bring him to the warehouse on Gangnam. No police? No witnesses? This is personal. Her blood turned to ice. She should leave. She should run. This man with his tattoos and his power and his barely controlled rage was dangerous, maybe even more dangerous than Minho. But as she caught her reflection in the dark window, bruised, exhausted, but somehow alive for the first time in years, she realized something terrifying. She didn't want to leave, and that scared her more than anything. Jada woke to sunlight, not the thin, gray light that filtered through her studio apartment's single grimy window, but real sunlight, golden, warm, pouring through floor-to-ceiling glass like liquid honey. For a disorienting moment, she didn't know where she was. The bed beneath her was impossibly soft, wrapped in sheets that felt like silk against her skin. The ceiling above her was high and pristine, white, unmarred by water stains or cracks. And when she turned her head, Seoul stretched out below her in glittering magnificence, a city of glass and steel and endless possibility. Then the memories came rushing back. Minho's fist, the black car, Jinwoo's cold eyes. I never lost you. She sat up too quickly, and pain lanced through her jaw. Her hand flew to her face, fingers finding the tender, swollen flesh. Everything felt surreal, like she'd stepped through a portal into someone else's life. The guest room door was slightly ajar. Through it, she could hear movement, quiet, controlled, deliberate. Jada swung her legs out of bed, noticing for the first time that she was wearing clothes that weren't hers. Soft gray pajamas that fit perfectly, expensive fabric that whispered against her skin. She didn't remember changing. Had she been so exhausted that his sister's clothes, she remembered, they belonged to his sister. The thought sent a chill through her. She followed the sounds down a hallway lined with abstract art, all blacks and whites and grays, beautiful but cold. The penthouse looked different in daylight. Less mysterious, more stark, still lonely. She found Jinwoo in the kitchen. He stood at the marble island, dressed in black slacks and a white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing the tattoos that crawled up his forearms, intricate patterns that looked like prayers written in ink. His hair was damp, like he'd recently showered, and he was cooking. The sight was so unexpected that Jada stopped in the doorway, unsure whether to announce herself or retreat. He looked up, his dark eyes finding hers with unnerving precision, like he'd known she was there all along. You should still be resting, he said, his tone neither warm nor cold, simply stating fact. I've slept enough. Her voice came out rougher than intended, scraped raw from crying and exhaustion. Sit. He gestured to one of the high-backed chairs at the island. There was that word again. Sit. A command disguised as invitation, but Jada was too tired, too sore, and too overwhelmed to argue. She slid onto the chair, wincing as her body reminded her of last night's violence. Jinwoo noticed immediately. His jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Instead, he placed a plate in front of her, scrambled eggs, toast, sliced fruit, arranged with surprising care, then a cup of coffee, prepared exactly the way she took it at the cafe. Black, 1 sugar. How did you... I pay attention, he said simply, returning to the stove. Jada stared at the food, her stomach churning. I'm not hungry. You need to eat. Not a request. Not even really advice. Just another fact in his carefully ordered world. You can't just... She stopped herself, frustration bubbling up. You can't just tell me what to do. I'm not yours to command. His lips twitched, not quite a smile, but close. Aren't you? No. But even as she said it, the word felt hollow. He set his own plate down and sat across from her, his movements fluid and precise. For a long moment, he simply studied her the way he had in the cafe, in the car, like she was a book he was learning to read. You should have called me sooner, he finally said. I don't need saving. This time the smile fully formed, small, knowing, dangerous. You already called. Just not with your voice. The words hit her like a physical blow, because he was right. The moment she'd pocketed that black card instead of throwing it away, the moment she'd allowed herself to hope that maybe, just maybe, someone saw her pain, she'd made her choice. Eat, he said again, softer this time. Then we'll talk. She picked up the fork with trembling hands. The eggs were perfect, fluffy, seasoned just right. She hadn't realized how hungry she was until the first bite. She ate mechanically, feeling his gaze on her the entire time. When she finished, he stood and retrieved a first aid kit from a drawer. Let me see your face. Dr. Han already. Dr. Han left hours ago. Jinwoo moved around the island, standing beside her now. The swelling needs to be checked again. He was too close. She could smell sandalwood and clean linen and something uniquely him. Her pulse quickened not from fear, but from something far more complicated. His fingers were surprisingly gentle as they tilted her chin upward, examining the bruise that had deepened overnight to a mottled purple-black. She felt his breath against her skin, saw something dark and dangerous flash through his eyes. Tell me about him, he said quietly, reaching for an ice pack. No, Jada. I said no. She pulled back, her hands gripping the edge of the counter. I don't need to relive it. Not for you. Not for anyone. His patience visibly thinned, a muscle ticking in his jaw. But instead of pushing, he stepped back, giving her space. You're protecting him. I'm protecting myself, she corrected. You think talking about it makes it better? It doesn't. It just makes it real again. He studied her for another long moment, then nodded slowly like he'd made a decision she wasn't privy to. He pulled out his phone. What are you doing? Jada asked, alarm rising in her chest. He didn't answer. Just pressed the phone to his ear and waited. When someone picked up, his voice went cold, the temperature in the room seeming to drop with it. Have you found him yet? A pause. I don't care what it takes. Find Minho Choi. Check his apartment, his usual spots, anyone he knows. I want him located within the hour. Another pause, his eyes never leaving Jada's face. No police. This gets handled my way. He ended the call. Jada's blood turned to ice. What are you going to do to him? What needs to be done? That's not an answer. It's the only one you're getting. His tone was final, absolute. Fear twisted in her stomach, not fear of him, but fear because of him. She'd escaped Minho's fists only to fall into the orbit of a man whose violence was calculated, controlled, and far more dangerous. You can't just... Her voice cracked. You can't just hurt people because you want to. I don't hurt people because I want to, Jinwoo replied, his voice dropping to something soft and lethal. I hurt people who deserve it. There's a difference. And who decides what someone deserves? I do. The absolute certainty in those two words was chilling. Jada stood abruptly, the chair scraping against marble. I need to leave. Where will you go? He didn't move to stop her, but his words were a cage all the same. Back to your apartment where he knows to find you. Back to the cafe where you're exposed, vulnerable. Back to a life of looking over your shoulder. That's not your decision to make. It became my decision, he said, his voice hardening. The moment you got in my car, the moment you accepted my protection, you don't get to walk back into danger after I've pulled you out of it. So what am I? Jada demanded, tears burning behind her eyes. Your prisoner? Your pet project? Another woman you can control? Something cracked in his expression. He closed the distance between them in 2 strides, his hands gripping her shoulders not roughly, but firmly enough that she couldn't escape. You, he said, his voice rough with emotion she hadn't heard before, are the first thing I've cared about in 6 years. And I will be damned if I let another man destroy another woman. He stopped himself, jaw clenched. Another woman, you what? Jada whispered. His eyes, those dark, devastating eyes, bore into hers. Another woman I failed. The words hung between them, heavy with grief and guilt, and something dangerously close to obsession. I'm not your sister, Jada said softly. No, he agreed, his grip loosening slightly. You're not. She didn't fight back. She didn't have fire. But you... His thumb brushed the edge of her bruise. Feather light. You do. And I'm going to make sure no one extinguishes it. Jada's breath caught. Because in that moment, she understood. She hadn't escaped one violent man for another. She'd walked into the protection of a man haunted by the ghost of someone he couldn't save, trying desperately to rewrite his past through her survival. And that was somehow more terrifying than anything Minho had ever done. The silence that followed Jinwoo's confession was deafening. Jada stood frozen, his words echoing in her mind. Another woman I failed. His hand still rested on her shoulders, his grip gentle now, almost uncertain, like he'd surprised himself with his own vulnerability. She should pull away, should demand answers, should do something other than stand here drowning in the intensity of his gaze. But before she could move, his phone buzzed. The spell broke. Jinwoo released her and stepped back, his mask sliding seamlessly into place as he checked the screen. Whatever he saw there made his expression harden. Excuse me, he said, his voice once again controlled, distant. He disappeared down the hallway, the phone already pressed to his ear. Jada released a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. She found herself wandering through the penthouse like a ghost, trailing her fingers along cold marble and expensive leather. Everything was immaculate, perfectly arranged, like a showroom rather than a home. No clutter, no warmth, no life, until she reached a door at the end of the hallway. It was slightly ajar, the only door in the entire penthouse that wasn't firmly closed. Through the gap, she could see soft morning light filtering through sheer curtains, illuminating what looked like a bedroom. She knew she shouldn't, knew it was a violation of privacy, but something drew her forward. The room was different from the rest of the penthouse, softer, warmer. The walls were painted a gentle cream instead of stark white. There was a bookshelf filled with worn paperbacks, a vanity with delicate perfume bottles still arranged on its surface, and on the walls photographs. So many photographs. A young woman smiled from every frame. She had Jinwoo's sharp cheekbones and dark eyes, but where his were guarded, hers were full of light. In one photo, she was laughing, her head thrown back in pure joy. In another, she stood beside a younger Jinwoo, her arm around his shoulders, both of them grinning like they had the world at their feet. Her name was Hanul. Jada spun around, her heart leaping into her throat. Jinwoo stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. I'm sorry, she stammered. I didn't mean to. It's okay, He stepped into the room, his movements careful, like he was entering a sacred space. I keep the door open sometimes, so it doesn't feel like a tomb. He moved to the bookshelf, his fingers trailing along the spines. She loved to read, poetry, mostly. Said it helped her make sense of things when the world felt too heavy. Jada's throat tightened. The clothes you gave me were hers. Yes. He turned to face her, and for the first time since they'd met, he looked tired. Not physically, but soul-deep exhausted. You're about the same size, I thought. He paused, jaw tightening. I thought they shouldn't just sit here, collecting dust. Jinwoo, she was like you, he continued, his voice barely above a whisper. Strong, resilient, always smiling even when she was breaking inside. His gaze dropped to the photograph in his hands. Henul in a graduation gown, beaming. She met him during her last year of university. A law student. Charming. Ambitious. Everyone loved him. Jada's stomach twisted, knowing where this was going. At first it was small things, Jinwoo said, setting the photo down with trembling hands. He didn't like her clothes, didn't like her friends, wanted to know where she was every minute of every day. She said it meant he cared. His voice hardened. By the time I noticed the bruises, she'd already perfected the lies. I fell. I'm clumsy. It's not what it looks like. Did you try to help her? Jada asked softly. Of course I tried. Pain cracked through his controlled facade. I begged her to leave him. Offered her money, a new apartment, protection, everything. But she kept saying it wasn't that simple. That he loved her. That she could fix him if she just tried harder. He moved to the window, his back to her now, shoulders rigid with tension. I was younger then. Still building my father's business, trying to prove myself. I thought I had time. Thought she'd eventually see reason and leave. The silence stretched, heavy with dread. She called me one night, Jinwoo continued, his voice fracturing. 3 a.m. She was crying, scared. Said they'd had a fight and she needed me. I told her I'd come get her in the morning, that I had an important meeting at dawn I couldn't miss. His hands curled into fists against the glass. I chose business over my own sister. Jinwoo. By morning, she was dead. The words came out flat, hollow. He'd strangled her in her sleep. When the police found her, she still had his fingerprints bruised into her throat. Jada's hand flew to her mouth, horror washing over her in waves. The official story was that he panicked after a domestic dispute. Got 15 years, out in 8 for good behavior. Jinwoo's reflection in the window was ghostly, haunted. 8 years, for taking the most beautiful soul I've ever known and extinguishing her like she was nothing. I'm so sorry, Jada whispered, tears streaming down her face. He turned to face her, and she saw it clearly now, the cracks in his armor, the grief he carried like stones in his chest, the guilt that had shaped him into the man he'd become. I've spent the last 6 years making sure men like him never breathe easy again, he said, his voice raw and unsteady. Every abuser I find, every woman I protect, it's not mercy. It's not even justice. It's me trying to go back in time and answer that phone call, trying to save her over and over again through strangers' faces. He stepped closer to Jada, his dark eyes glistening with unshed tears. And then I walked into that cafe and saw you. His voice cracked completely. Same bruise, same lies, same look in your eyes that screamed for help while your mouth said everything was fine. And I knew that if I walked away, if I did nothing, I'd lose you the same way I lost her. You don't even know me, Jada breathed. I know enough. His hand reached up, hovering near her face but not quite touching, like he was afraid she'd shatter. I know you're surviving something that should have destroyed you. I know you're brave enough to keep smiling even when you're drowning. And I know that I will not let another woman die because I chose convenience over courage. The weight of his words settled over them like snow, cold, suffocating, inescapable. Jada finally understood. This wasn't about her. Not really. She was a second chance he never thought he'd get. A chance to rewrite the ending of a story that had haunted him for 6 years. His control, his fury, his obsessive protection, they weren't about power. They were about grief. I'm not Henul, Jada said gently, echoing her words from earlier. I know. A single tear escaped down his cheek, the first crack in the dam. But maybe if I save you, I can finally forgive myself for failing her. The honesty broke something in Jada's chest, because she recognized that pain, the desperate need to rewrite the past, to make different choices, to somehow erase the scars that time couldn't heal. She'd been trying to save herself from Minho. Jinwoo was trying to save his sister from death. Neither of them could succeed, but maybe, just maybe, they could save each other from drowning in the wreckage. Slowly, carefully, Jada reached up and wiped the tear from his cheek. His eyes closed at her touch, his breath shuddering out like he'd been holding it for years. "You can't rewrite the past," she whispered. "No matter how many people you save." "I know." His voice was barely audible. "But I have to try." They stood there in Haenel's room, two broken people surrounded by the ghost of a woman who'd never escaped, bound together by trauma and the desperate, impossible hope that maybe this time, the ending could be different. Outside, Seoul continued its endless rhythm, cars honking, people rushing, life moving forward whether they were ready or not. But in that moment, in that room full of memories and grief, time stood still. And for the first time since she'd met him, Jada saw Jinwoo Lee not as a dangerous man or a powerful crime boss, but as a brother who'd lost his sister. And maybe, just maybe, that made all the difference. If you're feeling this story, drop a love emoji in the comments. And if you've ever had to find the courage to say no when everything in you is screaming to stay silent, you're not alone. Hit subscribe, we're just getting started. 3 days after Jada had stood in Haenul's room and seen Jinwoo Lee cry, he walked back into the Blue Orchid Cafe. She noticed him immediately, impossible not to. He moved through the space like gravity itself shifted to accommodate him, conversations dropping to whispers as he passed. He wore all black again, his tattoos stark against his skin, that gold cross catching the afternoon light, and he sat in her section. Mrs. Park appeared at Jada's elbow, her expression carefully neutral. "Table 7 is yours," she said quietly. "Be polite." "I'm always polite," Jada muttered, but her hands trembled as she grabbed her notepad. Jinwoo looked up as she approached, and something in his expression softened, barely perceptible. "But there, Jada, Mr. Lee." She kept her voice professional, aware of the eyes tracking their interaction. "What can I get you?" "Coffee, black," a pause, and the truth about how you're doing. Heat crawled up her neck. "I'm fine." Liar. But his lips curved slightly. "I'll take the coffee, and you'll take this." He slid something across the table, a phone, brand new, still in its box, programmed with one number, mine. "If you need me, use it. I have a phone that he knows about." His eyes held hers. "This one's clean, untraceable, safe." She wanted to refuse, wanted to tell him she didn't need his protection, his gifts, his constant shadow. But the weight of the phone in her hand felt like a lifeline she wasn't brave enough to cut. "Just the coffee, then," she said, tucking the phone into her apron. His smile widened small, knowing, dangerous. For now. He came back the next day, and the day after that, always in her section, always ordering the same thing, always watching her with those dark, devastating eyes that saw too much. Other customers started to notice, started to whisper. The waitstaff gave her curious glances, but no one asked questions. Not when Jinwoo Lee left tips that were more than most people made in a week. But it wasn't just the cafe. On her third night back at work, Jada left through the employee entrance and found 2 men in tailored suits waiting beside a black car. She recognized them from the night Minho had attacked her. "Miss Richards," one of them said with a polite nod. "Mr. Lee asked us to escort you home." "That's not necessary." It wasn't a request, miss. She wanted to argue, wanted to insist on her independence. But the memory of Minho's fist, the taste of blood, the terror of being cornered, it was still too fresh. So she let them drive her home. Let them wait until she was safely inside her building. Let them become a fixture of her routine. By the end of the week, she'd spotted Jinwoo's car parked across from her apartment building 3 separate times. Never intrusive, never threatening, just there. A silent sentinel in the darkness. It should have felt suffocating, should have felt like trading one cage for another. But somehow, it felt like being seen. On the 8th day, Jada had enough. She marched out of the cafe after her shift, ignoring the waiting car, and walked the 12 blocks to the address she'd found on the business card he'd given her, a sleek office building in Gangnam, all glass and steel and money. The receptionist tried to stop her. "You can't just tell him Jada Richards is here," she said firmly. "He'll see me." 5 minutes later, she was in an elevator shooting up to the 23rd floor, her heart hammering against her ribs. The doors opened directly into a private office, minimalist, powerful, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Jinwoo stood at those windows, his back to her, phone pressed to his ear. "I don't care what it costs. Buy out their contract and make sure they understand that loyalty has consequences." He ended the call and turned, his expression shifting from cold authority to something softer when he saw her. "Jada, what's wrong?" "You." She strode into the room, anger giving her courage. "You're what's wrong. The cafe, the escorts, the car watching my apartment. You can't control my life like this." He set his phone down carefully. "I'm not controlling your life." "Then what do you call it?" "Ensuring no one else does." He moved closer, his presence overwhelming in the confined space. There's a difference. Is there? She laughed bitterly. Because from where I'm standing, it feels like I escaped one man who watched my every move only to fall into the orbit of another. Something dangerous flashed in his eyes. I am nothing like him. Aren't you? She challenged, even as her heart raced. You decide where I go, who protects me, what I need. I decide, he interrupted, his voice dropping to something lethal and soft, that you get to live without fear, that you get to walk home without looking over your shoulder, that you get to exist in this city without wondering if today's the day he shows up again. He stopped inches from her, his intensity radiating like heat. If that makes me controlling, then yes. I'm controlling the threat, not you. The words hung between them, charged with something electric. I'm not your responsibility, Jada whispered, but even she could hear how weak it sounded. You became my responsibility, he replied, the moment I asked who hit you, and you lied to protect him instead of yourself. I wasn't protecting him, I was protecting me, by staying silent. His jaw tightened. That's not protection, Jada. That's survival. And you deserve more than just surviving. The truth of it crashed over her like a wave. Because he was right. She'd spent 2 years just trying to make it through each day, calling it strength when really it was slow suffocation. This tension between us, Jinwoo said quietly, his gaze searching hers. You feel it too. It wasn't a question. And she couldn't lie to him, not about this. I'm afraid of you, she admitted. Good. Fear keeps you sharp. I'm also afraid of how much I want to trust you. His expression softened completely. That's the part that takes courage. Before she could respond, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and something in his expression shifted, hardened. What is it? Jada asked. Nothing you need to worry about. But the lie was transparent. Jinwoo. Go home, Jada. His voice was suddenly distant, controlled. My men will take you. She wanted to argue, to demand answers, but the look in his eyes told her this conversation was over. As the elevator doors closed between them, she saw him on the phone again, his expression carved from stone, and she couldn't shake the feeling that something dangerous was about to unfold. In a cramped apartment in Itaewon, far from Gangnam's glittering towers, Minho Choi sat across from a man whose reputation made even hardened criminals nervous. Park Dae-jung, Jinwoo Lee's oldest rival. So, Park said, his smile not reaching his cold eyes, Lee has taken an interest in your woman. She's not his. Minho spat, his face still bearing the bruises from where Jinwoo's men had persuaded him to leave Seoul. She's mine, and he had no right to. Lee doesn't ask for rights, he takes them. Park leaned back, studying Minho like an insect. But his protection of this girl, it shows weakness, attachment, and attachments can be exploited. Minho's eyes narrowed. What are you saying? I'm saying that if someone were to, say, reclaim what Lee has taken, it would send a message, that his power has limits. Park's smile widened. And I reward men who help me send such messages. You want me to grab Jada. I want you to remind Jinwoo Lee that in this city, no one is untouchable, not even the women he decides to protect. Park slid a burner phone across the table. When the moment's right, you call this number. My men will assist. And afterward you disappear with enough money to start over wherever you like. Minho picked up the phone, rage and greed warring in his chest. And her? After she serves her purpose? Park shrugged. I don't care what you do with her. Minho's hand closed around the phone. When? Soon. Very soon. It happened on a Thursday night. Jada had stayed late at the cafe, covering for another waitress. By the time she left, the streets were emptier than usual, the neon signs casting long shadows across rain-slicked pavement. Jinwoo's men were waiting by their usual spot, but she waved them off. I need to walk, she'd said, needing just 10 minutes of autonomy, of breathing room. They'd hesitated but nodded, maintaining their distance. It was the opening Minho had been waiting for. She was 3 blocks from her apartment when the van pulled up beside her, quick, silent, efficient. The door slid open, and hands grabbed her before she could scream. A cloth pressed over her mouth, chemical sweet and suffocating. The world tilted, then went dark. Jada woke to the smell of rust and motor oil. Her head pounded, vision swimming as consciousness returned in painful waves. She was in some kind of warehouse abandoned by the look of it, with broken windows and exposed beams. Her wrists were bound behind her back, zip ties cutting into her skin, and Minho stood in front of her, flanked by 3 men she didn't recognize. Welcome back, he said, his smile twisted with rage and triumph. Miss me? Terror flooded her system. She tried to speak, but her mouth was dry, her tongue thick. Minho, shut up. He backhanded her casually, and pain exploded across her already bruised cheek. You don't get to talk, not after what you did. Running to him, to Jinwoo Lee. He spat the name like poison. I didn't. I said shut up. He grabbed her jaw, forcing her to look at him. You think he cares about you? You think you're special? He laughed bitterly. You're just a message, bait, and once he comes for you, and he will come, Park Dae-jung's men will be waiting. Jada's blood turned to ice. This wasn't just about Minho's rage. This was something bigger, more dangerous. They'll kill him, she whispered. Maybe, maybe not. Minho released her roughly. But either way, you and I are leaving this city tonight, and I'm going to teach you what happens to women who forget who they belong to. One of the men stepped forward. We should move. Lee's people will be looking. He never finished the sentence. The warehouse doors exploded inward with a deafening crash. They came like shadows given form. Jinwoo's men poured through every entrance doors, windows, gaps in the walls moving with military precision. Within seconds, the warehouse was surrounded, Minho's men on their knees with guns pressed to their heads. And then he walked in. Jinwoo Lee moved through the chaos like a king surveying his domain unhurried, controlled, absolutely lethal. He wore all black, his tattoos stark in the harsh fluorescent light, and in his hand, he carried a gun that looked almost casual, like an extension of his arm. His eyes found Jada first assessing, cataloging every bruise, every cut, every violation. Something murderous flickered across his face. Then his gaze shifted to Minho. The temperature in the warehouse dropped. Jingwoo. Mingya started, his bravado crumbling. Quiet. The single word was so cold, so absolute, that Minho's mouth snapped shut. Jinwoo crossed the space slowly, deliberately, each footstep echoing like a death knell. He stopped in front of Jada, his free hand reaching up to gently tilt her face toward the light. His jaw clenched when he saw the fresh bruise. Did he touch you? His voice was barely above a whisper. I'm okay, Haida managed. That's not what I asked. Before she could answer, Jinwoo turned to one of his men, cut her loose. Within seconds, the zip ties were gone, and Jada was on her feet, blood rushing painfully back into her hands. Jinwoo steadied her with a hand on her elbow, his touch gentle despite the violence radiating from him. Then he turned to Minho. On your knees. Listen, I was just... on your knees. The gun rose, aimed directly at Minho's forehead. Minho dropped, trembling. His earlier confidence shattered. Please, Jinwoo stepped closer, and Jada saw something terrifying in his expression, not rage, but calm. The kind of calm that comes before execution. This is what you do? Jinwoo asked softly, almost conversationally. You hit women? You tie them up? You terrorize people weaker than you because it makes you feel like a man? It wasn't she. To her? Jinwoo's voice dropped to something barely human. You did this to her? The gun pressed against Minho's forehead, and Jada saw Jinwoo's finger move toward the trigger. Jinwoo, don't. She lurched forward, her voice cracking. Please, don't do this. He didn't look at her, his focus locked on Minho like a predator sizing up prey. Give me one reason why. Because if you kill him, Jada said, tears streaming down her face, you're no better than he is. I'm nothing like him. Prove it. She grabbed his arm, forcing him to look at her. You told me everyone deserves to feel safe, that you protect people. But if you do this, if you become the monster he thinks you are, then what's the difference? Jinwoo's hand trembled, the first sign of weakness she'd ever seen in him. He hurt you, and killing him won't undo that. Her voice softened. But it will destroy the man you're trying to be, the man your sister would have wanted you to be. The mention of Hainel cracked something in him. His eyes closed briefly, pain flickering across his features. For a long, terrifying moment, nothing moved. The warehouse held its collective breath. Then, slowly, agonizingly, the gun lowered. Jinwoo stepped back, his expression carved from stone. He turned to his men, his voice hollow. Let him go. Sir? One of them looked confused. I said let him go. Jinwoo's hands clenched into fists, the gun hanging loose at his side. Let him crawl out of this city like the vermin he is. He looked down at Minho, who was sobbing now, pathetic and broken. But understand this, Jinwoo said, his voice quiet and absolutely lethal. If you ever look in her direction again, if you so much as breathe the same air as her, you don't get to crawl. You don't get to run. You don't get to exist. He crouched down, his face inches from Minho's. I'll erase you so completely that even your mother won't remember your name. Are we clear? Minho nodded frantically, unable to speak. Good. Jinwoo stood, disgust etched into every line of his body. Get him out of my sight. Two of his men hauled Minho up and dragged him toward the exit. The other men followed, leaving Jinwoo and Jada alone in the cavernous space. The silence was deafening. Jinwoo stood with his back to her, shoulders rigid, the gun still in his hand. She could see him shaking not from fear, but from the effort of restraint. Jinwoo, that was the hardest thing I've ever done. His voice was raw, broken. Letting him walk away after what he did to you, it's burning through me like acid. I know. Jada moved closer. But you did it anyway. For you. He finally turned, and she saw the cost written in his eyes, the war between his nature and his choice. Only for you. She closed the distance between them and did something she'd never thought she would. She wrapped her arms around him, pressing her face against his chest. He went rigid with surprise. Then slowly, carefully, his arms came around her, holding her like she was made of glass. Thank you, she whispered. He didn't respond, just held her tighter, his face buried in her hair, his whole body trembling with the effort of mercy. And in that moment, Jada realized she was no longer just his second chance. She was becoming something far more dangerous. She was becoming his reason. The penthouse felt different when they returned. Darker, quieter, heavy, with the weight of what had almost happened in that warehouse. Jada sat on the edge of the leather sofa, her hands still trembling from adrenaline, her wrists marked with red lines from the zip ties. She stared at the Seoul skyline through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city lights blurring together through her unshed tears. Jinwoo moved through the space like a ghost, pouring whiskey into a crystal glass with mechanical precision. He downed it in one swallow, then poured another. She'd never seen him drink before. You should eat something, he said without looking at her, his voice hollow. I'm not hungry. You need to. I said I'm not hungry. The words came out sharper than intended. Silence fell between them, thick and suffocating. Jinwoo set the glass down with a soft clink and finally turned to face her. He looked exhausted, not physically, but emotionally drained, like showing mercy had cost him something vital. I should have killed him, he said quietly. No. He deserved it. Maybe. Jada's voice cracked. But you didn't, and that matters. Does it? He moved closer, his movements stiff, controlled. Because right now all I can think about is that he's still breathing while you're sitting here shaking. I'm fine. Stop saying that. His voice hardened. Stop lying. I'm not. You're terrified, he interrupted, crouching down in front of her so they were eye level. You're traumatized and hurting and pretending to be strong because that's what you've done for so long you don't know how to do anything else. The truth of it hit her like a physical blow. And suddenly, the dam she'd built over years of survival, brick by brick, lie by lie, began to crack. You can't fix me, she whispered, her voice breaking. I'm not trying to. Jinwoo's expression softened, his hands resting gently on her knees. I just need you to stop pretending you're fine when you're not. If I stop pretending, tears spilled over, hot and unstoppable. If I let myself feel it, I don't know if I'll survive it. Then I'll make sure you do. His hands moved to cup her face with devastating gentleness, his thumbs catching her tears. But you can't keep carrying this alone, Jada. It's killing you. She shook her head, sobbing now, years of pain clawing its way up her throat. You don't understand. Then help me understand. His voice dropped to something raw, pleading. He tilted her face up, forcing her to meet his eyes, those dark, devastating eyes that saw everything she tried to hide. Talk to me. It wasn't a command. It wasn't even a request. It was a plea from a man who'd spent 6 years drowning in his own guilt, begging her to let him help shoulder her pain. And something inside her, the last wall she'd built to protect herself, finally shattered. He started hitting me 3 months after we moved in together, she began, her voice trembling but steady. Small things at first. A shove when he was angry, grabbing my arm too hard. He'd apologize after, say he was stressed, that he didn't mean it. Jinwoo's jaw clenched, but he said nothing, just listened. Then it got worse. The words tumbled out now, unstoppable. He'd accuse me of cheating if I came home late from work, if I talked to another man, if I smiled too much at customers. He said I was trying to embarrass him, to make him look weak. Her hands twisted in her lap. The first time he hit me, really hit me, I'd forgotten to buy his favorite beer. Such a stupid thing. He backhanded me so hard I saw stars. Then he cried and begged for forgiveness and Her voice broke. I forgave him. I actually forgave him. Jada. Every time after that, I told myself it was the last time. That if I just tried harder, loved him better, stayed quieter, he'd stop. Tears streamed down her face. I started working double shifts so I wouldn't have to go home. Started covering bruises with makeup so no one would ask questions. Started believing maybe I was the problem. Jinwoo's hands tightened on her face, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. There were nights, Jada continued, her voice barely above a whisper, when I'd lie awake after he'd hit me, and I'd think about ending it. Not leaving ending it, because that felt easier than admitting I was trapped. Easier than facing how pathetic I'd become. You're not pathetic. His voice was fierce, broken. You're a survivor. I'm broken. She sobbed into her hands. He broke me, Jinwoo. And I let him. For 2 years I let him break me piece by piece until I didn't even recognize myself anymore. Look at me. When she didn't, he gently pulled her hands away from her face. Jada, look at me. She raised her eyes to his, and what she saw there stole her breath, not pity, not disgust, but understanding. Raw, painful understanding. You're not broken, he said, his voice thick with emotion. You're wounded. There's a difference. Broken things can't heal, but wounds. His thumb traced the fading bruise on her jaw. Wounds close. Scars fade. And you will heal from this. How do you know? Because I've watched you. A tear finally escaped down his cheek. You think you're weak because you survived instead of fought back? That's not weakness, Jada. That's strength. You stayed alive when everything in you wanted to give up. You kept working, kept saving, kept planning your escape. You never stopped fighting, you just fought quietly. His forehead pressed against hers, his breath warm on her skin. And that's the bravest thing I've ever seen. The words broke something fundamental inside her. All the pain she'd swallowed, all the tears she'd hidden, all the screams she'd silenced. They came pouring out in great, heaving sobs that shook her entire body. Jinwoo gathered her into his arms, holding her as she fell apart. He didn't try to stop her tears or quiet her cries. He just held her, one hand cradling her head, the other wrapped around her waist, anchoring her through the storm. Every slap, she sobbed against his chest. Every time he called me worthless, stupid, useless. Every night I cried myself to sleep, wondering what I did wrong. Nothing. His voice was fierce. You did nothing wrong. Then why did he? Because he's a coward who needed someone weaker to blame for his own failures. Jinwoo pulled back slightly, his hands framing her face, forcing her to see the truth in his eyes. You didn't deserve any of it, Jada. Not one hit, not one insult, not 1 second of fear. She crumpled against him again, and he held her tighter, his own tears falling into her hair. They stayed like that for what felt like hours, her breaking apart, him holding her together. Both of them crying for different reasons but the same pain. When her sobs finally quieted to hiccuping breaths, Jinwoo spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper. You're safe now. He pressed his lips to her forehead, gentle, reverent. You don't owe anyone your pain anymore. Not him, not the world, not even yourself. What if I can't let it go? She whispered. Then I'll help you carry it. His arms tightened around her. For as long as it takes. Jada lifted her head, meeting his eyes through her tears. Why? Because someone should have done this for my sister. His voice cracked. And because... He paused, something vulnerable flickering across his face. Because you matter to me, Jada. More than you should. More than I planned. The confession hung between them, raw and honest. She reached up, her trembling hand cupping his jaw, feeling the wetness of his tears. Thank you, she whispered, for listening, for hearing me, for her voice broke, for making me feel like I'm worth saving. You were always worth saving. He turned his face into her palm, his eyes closing. I just gave you permission to believe it. Outside, Seoul continued its endless rhythm. But inside that penthouse, 2 broken people held each other in the darkness, their pain finally spoken, their silence finally shattered. And for the first time in years, Jada Richards allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she deserved to heal. 6 weeks passed, like pages turning in a book. Jada was finally learning to read. Minho Choi vanished completely. Jinwoo's sources confirmed he'd fled to Busan, then further south, eventually leaving Korea altogether. There were whispers he'd taken a boat to the Philippines with what little money he'd saved, too terrified to ever return. Good riddance. The nightmares came less frequently now. Jada still flinched at sudden movements, still tensed when men raised their voices. But the panic attacks that had once left her gasping on bathroom floors were fading. Slowly, carefully, one breath at a time. Jinwoo had given her space to heal, physically present but emotionally patient. He still appeared at the cafe, still had his men escort her home, but there was a gentleness to his protection now. Less possession, more partnership. And somewhere in those quiet weeks, between shared meals and late-night conversations on the penthouse balcony, something shifted between them. It started small. 3 weeks after the warehouse, Jada had been restless, pacing the penthouse while Jinwoo worked at his laptop. She'd picked up a pen from his desk and started doodling on a napkin, just shapes at first. Then faces, then a rough sketch of the Seoul skyline. She hadn't realized he was watching until he spoke. You're an artist. She'd looked up, startled, What? No, that's beautiful. He gestured to the napkin. How long have you been drawing? I used to, before. She'd stopped, the words catching. Before everything. I studied art in Jamaica before I moved here. But I gave it up when Minho told her it was a waste of time. When he said she'd never be good enough. When she stopped believing she deserved to create anything beautiful. Jinwoo had simply nodded, filed the information away behind those dark, observant eyes. She'd thought nothing of it. Until 4 days later, when she'd returned from her shift to find the penthouse transformed. What is this? Jada had stood frozen in the doorway of what had been a spare room. Sunlight poured through massive windows that hadn't been there before. The walls were painted soft cream, and along one side stood easels, canvases, brushes still in their packaging, paints, acrylics, oils, watercolors arranged in neat rows, a drafting table, professional lighting, everything an artist could dream of. Jinwoo had leaned against the door frame, watching her reaction with something almost vulnerable in his expression. You said you gave it up. I thought maybe you'd want it back. Tears had blurred her vision. Jinwoo, this is too much. It's not enough. He'd moved closer, his voice soft. You've spent years making yourself smaller to survive. I want to give you space to be bigger. To create, to remember who you were before he tried to erase you. She turned to him then, seeing not the dangerous man who commanded fear, but someone who understood what it meant to lose yourself. Thank you, she'd whispered. He'd smiled, small, genuine, devastating. Paint something beautiful, Jada. And she had. Every day after her shifts, she'd lose herself in color and canvas. At first, her hands were clumsy, uncertain, like learning a language she'd once spoken fluently. But gradually, muscle memory returned. The brush felt natural again. The paint became poetry. She painted her pain first dark, violent strokes of purple and black, then her fear jagged reds and deep blues. And finally, slowly, she began painting hope, gold and cream and soft pink sunrises. Jinwoo never intruded. But sometimes she'd find him standing in the doorway, watching her work with an expression she couldn't quite name. Pride, maybe, or something deeper. It was a Saturday morning when everything changed. Jada woke to find Jinwoo already awake, sitting on the balcony with coffee in the sunrise. She'd started sleeping in the guest room less and less, often falling asleep on the sofa after their late-night talks, waking to find herself covered with a blanket he'd draped over her. She joined him outside, accepting the coffee he'd already prepared cream. 1 sugar, exactly how she liked it. I have something for you, he said after a long, comfortable silence. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. Jada's heart stuttered. Jinwoo, it's not what you think. His lips quirked slightly as he opened it. Inside lay a single silver key on a delicate chain. What is it? A choice. He removed the key from the box, holding it up to catch the morning light. There's a house on the coast, Jeju Island. Private, secure, with a studio overlooking the ocean. I've had it prepared for you. Her breath caught. I don't understand. You can go there, he continued, his voice carefully neutral. Start over. New life, new name if you want. Everything's taken care of, finances, security, anything you need. You'll never have to worry about money or safety again. You're sending me away? The words came out smaller than intended. I'm giving you a choice. His dark eyes met hers, and she saw the vulnerability there, the fear of losing her warring with his need to give her freedom. You can go there and be free. Or, he paused, something raw flickering across his face. You can stay here, with me. Silence stretched between them, heavy with possibility. If I stay, Jada asked carefully, her heart hammering. What am I to you? Jinwoo set down his coffee and turned to face her fully. For a long moment, he just looked at her like he was memorizing every detail, preparing for the possibility she might choose to leave. When I lost Hanul, he began quietly, I thought I'd never care about anyone again. Caring meant pain. Attachment meant loss. So I built walls, power, control, fear. I became someone people respected but nobody loved. He reached out, his fingers brushing a strand of hair from her face with devastating gentleness. Then you walked into my life with your bruises and your lies and your unbreakable spirit, and those walls started crumbling. His hand cupped her jaw, thumb grazing her cheekbone, where the last faint shadow of her bruise had finally faded. At first, I told myself you were my redemption, a second chance to save someone I'd failed to save before. And now, she whispered, now you're not my redemption, Jada. His voice dropped to something achingly vulnerable. You're my reason, the reason I wake up wanting to be better, the reason I showed mercy when everything in me screamed for violence, the reason this penthouse finally feels like a home instead of a mausoleum. Tears slipped down her cheeks. I'm afraid. Of me? Of how much I want to stay. She laughed wetly. 6 weeks ago, I was terrified of you. Now I'm terrified of leaving you. How did that happen? I stopped trying to save you, he said softly, and started letting you save me. The truth of it hung between them, two broken people who'd somehow found wholeness in each other's brokenness. Jada looked at the silver key in his hand, then back at his face, the face she'd learned to read like her own. The eyes that saw her completely, the man who'd given her back her voice. If I stay, she said carefully, I'm not staying as your obligation, or your project, or someone you protect because of guilt. Then what are you staying as? She reached up, her hand covering his where it still cupped her face. As someone who chooses you, every day. Not because I need saving, but because I want to be here. Something in his expression cracked open hope and disbelief and overwhelming relief. Are you sure? No. She smiled through her tears. I'm terrified, but for the first time in years, I'm choosing what scares me because I want it, not because I'm trapped by it. Jinwoo's eyes glistened. You can still take the key. Change your mind tomorrow, next week, next year. The house is yours regardless. Then I'll keep it. She took the key from his hand, closing her fingers around the cool metal. As a reminder that I have choices, and that I'm choosing this, you, not a possession, he whispered, echoing her earlier question. A reason. She leaned forward, closing the distance between them, and pressed her forehead to his. Then be my reason too. His arms came around her, careful, reverent, like she was something precious he'd been given permission to hold. And in the morning light, surrounded by soul's awakening symphony, two people who'd survived their own separate hells chose each other, not out of necessity, but out of hope. 4 months later, Jada stood on the penthouse balcony, wrapped in one of Jinwoo's shirts, watching Seoul wake beneath her like a galaxy coming to life. The city stretched endlessly in every direction, millions of lights, millions of lives, millions of stories unfolding in the pre-dawn darkness. She'd learned to love this view, not because it represented power or wealth, but because it represented possibility. From this height, everything seemed reachable. Every dream felt within grasp. Her reflection in the glass showed a woman she barely recognized from 4 months ago. Her bruises had faded completely, leaving behind smooth brown skin that finally felt like her own again. She'd gained weight, the healthy kind, from eating without fear, from sleeping through the night without nightmares. Her hair had grown longer, natural curls framing her face instead of being tied back in the severe ponytail she'd worn to stay invisible. But the biggest change wasn't physical. It was the light in her eyes, the way she held herself not defensive anymore, but open, the way she smiled easily now, laughed without fear, spoke without measuring every word for potential consequences. She'd found herself again. Or maybe she'd become someone new entirely. Behind her, she heard the sliding door open, felt the shift in air that signaled his presence before he even spoke. Couldn't sleep. Jinwoo's voice was rough with sleep, intimate in the quiet morning. Didn't want to. She glanced over her shoulder, finding him in gray sweatpants and a black t-shirt. His hair mussed, looking more human than dangerous. The sunrise is too beautiful to miss. He joined her at the railing, their shoulders brushing. The casual intimacy of the gesture still made her heart flutter the way they'd learned each other's spaces, each other's silences, each other's needs. They stood in comfortable quiet, watching pink and gold bleed across the horizon. Mrs. Park called yesterday, Jada said eventually. The Blue Orchid is expanding. She wants me to manage the new location. That's incredible. Jinwoo turned to look at her, pride evident in his expression. Will you take it? I don't know. She bit her lip. The gallery in Hongdae also reached out. They want to feature my work in their emerging artist showcase next month. Jada, that's... His smile was genuine, unguarded. That's amazing. It's terrifying, she admitted. Putting my work out there, letting people see what I've created. What if they hate it? They won't. His hand found hers on the railing, fingers intertwining naturally. Your art is extraordinary, raw and honest and brave. It's my pain on canvas. It's your healing on canvas, he corrected gently. There's a difference. She squeezed his hand, drawing strength from his certainty. These past months, he'd become her biggest supporter, not controlling her choices, but encouraging her to make them. Not deciding her path, but walking beside her as she forged it herself. Too many good things, she murmured. Sometimes I wake up afraid it's all a dream, that I'll blink and find myself back in that tiny apartment, waiting for him to come home angry. You won't, Jinwoo's voice was firm. That life is over. Because of you. No. He turned to face her fully, his free hand lifting to cup her face, a gesture that had become as natural as breathing between them. Because of you. I gave you a way out. You're the one who walked through the door and kept walking. The truth of it settled over her like a benediction. She had saved herself. He'd just reminded her she was worth saving. You still think I'm a monster? He asked quietly, something vulnerable flickering in his dark eyes. It was a question he'd asked before, in different ways, still haunted by the violence that had shaped him, still uncertain if mercy could ever balance the blood on his hands. Jada smiled, small and knowing. No. Just a man learning how to be human again. His expression softened completely, the last of his walls crumbling. Is it working? You brought me hot chocolate while I was painting at 3 a.m. last week, she said, her smile widening. And you researched art techniques so you could understand what I was creating. And yesterday you spent an hour helping me stretch canvases even though you had meetings. She reached up, her thumb brushing his jaw. So yes, it's working. I'm still learning, he admitted. Still figuring out how to care for someone without controlling them, how to protect without possessing. We're both learning. She leaned into his touch. How to trust after betrayal. How to love after violence. How to be whole people instead of broken pieces pretending. Love? He caught the word, his breath hitching slightly. Jada's heart raced, but she didn't take it back. Is that okay? Instead of answering with words, he pulled her closer, his forehead resting against hers. It's terrifying, he whispered, echoing her earlier words. I haven't let myself love anyone since Hanul died. Didn't think I deserved to. And now? Now I think maybe, his voice cracked, maybe she'd want me to be happy. Maybe she'd want me to live instead of just survive. Tears burned in Jada's eyes. I think she'd be proud of who you've become. A man who chooses mercy over violence? A man who chooses love over fear. The words hung between them, sacred and true. Dawn continued its slow burn across the sky, soul transforming from darkness to light, the city humming with possibility and promise. Somewhere below, millions of people were waking to their own stories, some tragic, some beautiful, all unfolding breath by breath. Jada rested her head against Jinwoo's shoulder, feeling his arm wrap around her waist, holding her close. They fit together perfectly now, two people who'd learned each other's shapes, each other's scars, each other's languages. Talk to me, he whispered into her hair the same words he'd spoken in the cafe, in the penthouse, in the moments when her silence had been too heavy to carry alone. But this time, the words weren't a command or even a plea. They were an invitation, a promise, a future. And this time, when Jada spoke, it wasn't from fear or pain or the desperate need to be heard. It was from love. I want to do the gallery showcase, she said softly. And I want you there when I do. Not as my protector or my savior, but as what? His voice was barely audible. She pulled back slightly, meeting his eyes, those dark, devastating eyes that had learned to see her completely. As mine. If you want to be. His smile broke across his face like sunrise, slow, warm, transforming. I've been yours since the moment you got in my car and refused to stay broken. And I've been yours, she admitted. Since the moment you asked who hit me and actually cared about the answer. He kissed her then, soft and reverent and full of promises neither of them knew how to speak yet. A kiss that tasted like healing and hope and second chances neither of them thought they deserved. When they pulled apart, the sun had fully risen, bathing soul in golden light. What do we do now? Jada asked, slightly breathless. Jinwoo smiled against her lips. We live. We create. We choose each other every day, until choosing becomes as natural as breathing. No more monsters? No more monsters, he agreed. Just two people learning how to be human together. She kissed him again, softer this time, sealing the promise. And as soul hummed its endless symphony below them, Jada Richards and Jinwoo Lee stood wrapped in each other's arms, no longer haunted by the ghosts of who they'd been, but hopeful for who they were becoming. Together. Finally. Home. Thank you for being here. If this story moved you, please subscribe and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Remember, everyone deserves to feel safe. Everyone deserves to be heard. Until next time, may your mirror always reflect hope.